Today I'm going to take you back a few hundred years because in the 19th century the landscape of Great Britain looked a lot different from what it does today. Back then it wasn't so much a kind of London-centric United Kingdom that we know today. And this map here illustrates probably what I'm talking about. We can see here in the 19th century we had these very, very large areas which were coal fields. So for example we had this one here, which is a big one in Yorkshire, and further to the north around Newcastle, so where all the Geordies live, we had another kind of very, very rich coal field. Okay, now probably one of the most significant and most important coal fields was actually this one here, which is in South Wales, and actually that's the one that I'm going to talk to you about today. So let's hone in on that a little bit, and let's try and understand a little bit more about this. So the coal fields were really, really important. Why is that? Well, because they were full of coal, as you can imagine. And what that meant was that these South Wales valleys, where this kind of South Wales coalfield is, were very, very rich because this coal was mined. In other words, it was extracted from the ground and it was sold all over the world. So our South Wales coalfield runs, as you can see, from all the way from the west in Pembrokeshire, all the way over to the kind of southeast, just above Newport there. And as you go across from west to east, the type of coal that you could extract varied. In the west, in particular, you found anthracite, which is a coal with an extremely high calorific value. What that means is that this coal releases a lot of energy when it is burnt. Over here, towards the east, you found steam coal, which is a kind of more of a slow-burning coal, which was used a lot in the kind of steamships that were becoming more and more prevalent at the time. So South Wales was exporting this coal to all corners of the world. For example, the steam coal was getting sent as far away as Argentina to power the sort of steamships that they had down there. They were also exporting this coal to Western Europe and the Middle East as well. Now, all of this wealth meant that it dragged in loads and loads of people to the area. Okay, two reasons why. One, because we needed miners in these areas to actually mine the coal. So that brought in lots of people, in particular from areas of London, which might have been kind of short in work. So lots of people moved to the area to work the mines. It also meant that certain towns and cities in South Wales become very, very, very populous and also very, very rich in that respect. There's a town called Merthyr, which is roughly there. Had a huge boom in population because all of this coal, which was mined in the surrounding areas, could go into firing the steelworks, which you had in Merthyr. So Merthyr was a massive, massive industrial town back in the 19th century. Now, of course, Wales had to export this coal all over the world, and they did that through the ports of Barry Town, which is just down there, and of course Cardiff, which is just above it up there. Now, back then, and this is unbelievable if you actually went to Barry, it was the biggest coal exporting port in the whole freaking world. Okay, so now it's a very, very small seaside town. It's a resort. There's a Ferris wheel there. You can get an ice cream there in the summer. But back in the sort of 1800s, it was a hive of activity with loads and loads of people living and working there. So really, South Wales, and also not just South Wales, but also these other parts of the United Kingdom were kind of powerhouses of the time, due to this sort of due to this rich natural abundance of coal that we had. Now, as time went on, mining became more and more mining happened, and that means that we exhausted the supply of the coal that we had slowly. So that supply was dwindling, and also the demands of the modern world were changing. as we got into the early 20th century, people were turning away from burning coal, and they were looking at other fossil fuels, for example. People were beginning to refine crude oil into different fractions, and people were beginning to realize that actually burning things like diesel and petroleum would give you kind of more bang for your buck. In other words, more energy released per gram combusted. All right. So as the demand changed and as the supply began to run out a little bit, the mines were making less and less money, and they became under national control. In other words, the government started to take over control of the mines, and because they weren't making so much money, the government began to close the mines. And obviously this caused a big conflict, because hundreds, thousands of people in South Wales, their lives depended, their livelihoods, their jobs, their incomes depended on working these mines. Okay, so obviously when the government were talking about closing the mines, there was uproar. Okay, there was great upheaval, and this led to some rather kind of serious strike action, probably some of the most serious strike action that's been seen in the United Kingdom. Okay, now the workers were striking for two reasons, really. One, they were rebelling against the closures of the mines, which the government were forcing on top of them, but also they were striking because of the conditions. Because if you imagine that you've got a miner working underground in a coal mine, better put a safety hat on. It's a terrible safety hat, but nonetheless. These conditions are horrible, right? So if you're working down in a mine, it's going to be very, very dark. And like I said, because they'd exhausted lots of the kind of the coal that was kind of easiest to reach, they had to go into ever deeper seams of coal. And that was actually quite dangerous, because what you had there was little kind of pockets which contained a mixture of gases called fire damp, which is a mixture of lots and lots of different very, very dangerous kind of hydrocarbon gases like methane. So sometimes if you came across a kind of pocket of previously untapped coal, you might potentially trigger an explosion. Okay, so the conditions were actually also quite difficult. So the end result of these strikes was that actually the government won. Okay, so the government won these strikes. Okay, and slowly but surely, the mines of South Wales closed one by one, and by the modern day, we're down to very, very few open cast mines in areas such as Hillywine, which is very, very close to Merthyr. Okay, so that's it. That's a brief kind of history for you of mining and strike action in South Wales.